Hey guys, I hope you're all doing very well. Welcome back to another video. And today I'm going to be talking about Kung Fu Panda 4. Now, it's been pretty much a long while since we got a new Kung Fu Panda movie. I think Kung Fu Panda 3 came out in 2016, so we're literally looking at around 8 years since then. Now, I haven't kept up with the franchise for a while. I've watched Kung Fu Panda many, many years ago. I was pretty much going through puberty, like ever since, the period when the franchise came out. So to kind of really recall any of these films, I genuinely can't remember. And I didn't rewatch them before watching this one because I kind of felt nowadays with a lot of, franchises now, you don't really need to recall back on previous films. I think when a new movie or new sequel comes out, it's kind of got its own story and its own narrative and perspective. So I only just watched this literally just completely fresh, kind of not recalling the previous films. And overall, I actually enjoyed the film. I think it's a good film. I don't think it's really evolved so much compared to the previous films from what I would have remembered. But it definitely does have a lot of the charm and a lot of the humor, and the animation as well works really well. So overall, this was a good film. Now, for this review for this movie, I'm not going to make any sort of comparisons with the previous films because I haven't watched them for a while. So I'm only going to kind of focus on the feature sets for this film alone. So one of the things I will compliment with this movie is the characters. I think the characters are well written and they actually get some good development. So one of the main developments that a lot of this film goes into is really Po and Zhen. I think they really show they have a good bond and on-screen chemistry with each other, and they kind of build up, the story and the narrative as well. That's another thing I also want to compliment. They actually kept the narrative pretty simple and pretty brief, which I think works for this film pretty well for its runtime. I mean, the runtime of this movie was an hour and a half or an hour 40 minutes, which I think for a lot of new feature set films nowadays that have come out, it's actually pretty short considering we've been hitting 2 hours and above. And it didn't actually, the narrative didn't drift at all. It kept its focus pretty well, and they actually got some interesting characters. So I also thought the chameleon was an interesting villain, and this sort of villain was is a character that can sort of absorb the abilities of other villains and foes that Po has defeated from the previous films, and basically the chameleon would have all those feature sets to come up against him. And they do show that off. I will say they didn't choreograph a lot of the moves in the feature sets as well as I thought it would. I thought a lot of it was pretty short, pretty it kind of felt lackluster in some moments, which I think kind of didn't make the film stood out as much in some scenes. So I would have wished they would have taken that further, but I think for the runtime, I don't think they would have had a lot of time to deal with. But they could have at least extended that out essentially. So that's kind of one aspect I would talk about this film that was good, but could have been better with like the narrative and the way they develop characters. I also like to give some compliment to some of the voice acting as well. Jack Black's voice acting as Po was really good, and I think stood out quite a lot. But also, I was pretty surprised at Awkwafina as well. I mean, most people would look at Awkwafina, especially in The Little Mermaid, they couldn't stand her voice acting in that one. But her voice acting as Jin was actually pretty good. So there's some credit there where I could look at. So I think those things alone is a lot that I could really credit this movie for. Also, other things I also want to credit this movie for is that they actually made the humor actually works pretty well. I actually found some parts of the scenes to actually be quite comedic, and they actually do enlighten the mood a bit. So I mean, sometimes some comedic moments in a lot of films feel very forced and very predictable, and it kind of dies out the humor and a little bit. But this one actually worked pretty well, and there were actually some good moments that actually made it work. Especially there are some sort of chase scenes and fight scenes that came into play, and sometimes it would be an unexpected moment that actually would have led to a scene that was meant to drive the humor up, and it actually worked. And I think that's a lot of compliments I could really make with this film. Now, I'm not so sure the runtime, although it was short and brief and it kept to the narrative. I think it could have developed a little bit more in terms of building up the story and the characters a little bit more. I feel like most of the characters that you really do see in this film is mostly Poe and Jen. I mean, I don't think we saw so much of the chameleon as a character, mostly towards the end. And I also felt they didn't really use Master Shifu quite a lot. I think he was really mostly around mostly in most of the beginning and the end. I know I'm kind of diving into it a lot, but I felt, a lot of characters weren't used as much to their full capacity, essentially. But in all fairness, with this movie, I think it does actually work for, delivering moments when it needs to, and not drifting its narrative in any way. They actually kept the premise very, very simple, and it didn't want to sort of, focus on different sort of plot lines or anything like that. So all that together is something that I really appreciated. So overall, rating Kung Fu Panda 4, I'm going to give the movie a 7 out of 10. Like I said, I think it's a good film. I enjoyed it. I really think they actually did a good job with this movie. I don't know if this really stands out to the other films, but that could be just down to opinion. But I haven't seen them for a while, so I can't really say. But I think for a lot of it, in terms of its action, its animation, its voice acting, the simple premise of the story that was delivered, and its narrative, that's all I could compliment for. However, I will say I wish the movie could have actually developed more in terms of more choreographed scenes and just kind of expanding more of the character's motivations a little bit more, especially around the chameleon, because I think it could have been an interesting character, but I think they did kind of underused it a little bit. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed this film. Let me know what you think of this film. Please like, comment, subscribe, dislike if you want to dislike. Thanks for watching, and yeah, that's about it. See you later.